In the first episode of my new How Madden Fails to Simulate Football series, I discussed how Madden uses a shortened quarter length of 5 to 6 minutes to keep its football games around 30 minutes long, and how these shortened games lead to a rushed pace of play, fundamentally change the strategy of football, and also affect other aspects of game balance and game design, which are not easily fixed by simply setting the game to 15-minute quarters. That first video and its associated addendum still have not gotten a whole lot of views yet, but those of you who have watched it seem to really like it, so thank you for the support and the feedback. Thanks also to my patrons who help make all of this possible. If you really enjoy this content, then I hope you'll consider contributing via Patreon, and by doing so, you'll get yourself exclusive previews of upcoming content and also opportunities to vote on future content that I create. A link to the Patreon page is in the description, along with links to all of my sources. Now, we're going to move away from the rules of football and look at more specific game mechanics that fail to simulate how real football players actually play the sport of football. This episode and the next episode will look at how real NFL quarterbacks make reads and go through progressions, and then at how defensive pressure packages are used to disrupt those reads and progressions in order to force the quarterback to make bad decisions. Then, of course, we'll look at how Madden completely fails to model these aspects of football, and at the various ways in which EA and Tiburon have tried to fix or cover up these problems over the years. Some of their methods have worked, others have been little more than band-aid solutions. And now that we're going to be looking at actual football being played, I'm going to have to start using more clips of actual football being played. Some of this footage will come from NFL broadcasts and All-22 footage, all of which is being used under fair use, so hopefully I shouldn't see any copyright takedowns from the NFL. But a lot of the clips that I'm going to be using will also come from two YouTube football commentators whose content I really enjoy. I recommend that you check out both of their channels if you want to learn more about the X's and O's of football. The first will be Brett Kollmann's channel, and the second is JT O'Sullivan's QB School. Both of these channels have taught me a lot about how modern football teams game plan and execute, and their content has been instrumental in highlighting the ways that Madden just fails to get things right, even though neither channel ever talks about Madden. If I use any content from any other creators, I'll be sure to give a shout out and recommendation to their channels as well. As usual, all the sources that I use will be linked in the video description below. That includes any third-party video content that I show, any articles or news stories, and also any of my own blog posts or videos that I refer back to. Let's start by doing something a little different. Let's give some good faith towards EA and Madden and talk about the things that the game actually does get fairly right. In this case, pre-snap reads. As a quarterback in Madden, you'll be looking at whether the middle of the field is open or closed before the snap, and this will give you a reasonably accurate idea of whether the route concept that you called will be successful. If you call a cover 2 beating, post or dagger concept, but the defense comes out in a cover 3 look with a safety in the middle third, then you will be well served to either adjust the route using hot routes, audible out of the play entirely, or call a timeout to regroup and come up with another play. Over the past few years, Madden has also gradually introduced concepts such as reading the Mike linebacker. This determines who the blockers will prioritize blocking, which can be important if the defense sends multiple blitzers.
Really simple to ID. We should be watching TV, watching Madden, knowing exactly who the mic is now all the time.
Identifying the most dangerous blitzer as the mic ensures that someone on your offensive line will try to block him. Usually this will be the inside-most blitzer, the one lined up closest to the center. You can also slide your pass protection left or right to deal with an overload blitz coming from one direction or the other, and you can also assign a double team in order to neutralize a particularly dangerous pass rusher, your Aaron Donalds or Khalil Macks. To Madden's credit, it actually gets most of this stuff right. And hopefully all of these mechanics that I just mentioned that I like are still in the game by the time you're watching this, and that they haven't been stripped out by Tiburon in order to make room for some new gimmicky feature that they can plaster on the back of the box to sell units. A Madden user can make many of the same pre-snap reads that a real NFL quarterback would. The game will even highlight the key reads before the snap on certain plays to remind the user of what to look at in the defense and how to execute the selected play. It's good stuff. I don't have many complaints here. And the game's included skill trainer does a pretty decent job of introducing and teaching these concepts to the player if you choose to actually play that mode. Defenses can even disguise coverages, can fake blitzes, and can use other similar tactics to try to fool the human user and force a bad read. Again, this is good stuff. The problems begin when a CPU QB steps onto the field and only start to get worse when the ball is snapped. This is because Madden doesn't really have any mechanics in place to simulate the CPU team making pre-snap reads, whether it's on offense or defense. On the highest difficulties, I'm also fairly certain that the CPU knows your offensive play call and picks a defensive play that is supposed to be effective against that concept. It then executes the called play regardless of what the human player shows the CPU at the line of scrimmage or after the snap. This is a big reason why audibles and hot routes are such an effective part of Madden's meta. Sure, the CPU QBs won't...
Seeing ghosts.
But the CPU also won't adjust to what it sees at the line of scrimmage, which means that you can easily exploit the AI by modifying the play at the line of scrimmage. Once the ball is snapped, a real quarterback at any level of football, not just the NFL, will have a series of reads that he will have to make. Every play is going to have a target primary receiver. The whole play is designed to get the ball to this player. Which play is called will depend on what defense the offensive coordinator or head coach or whoever's calling the play is expecting. And that person will call a play designed to get the primary receiver into a soft spot in the supposed defense. Or for the primary target to beat his assigned defender one-on-one if the play caller suspects man coverage. This might mean calling a post route to exploit the hole between the safeties of a cover 2, or combining a post with a wheel route to force a corner in cover 3 to have to choose which receiver to run with, and so forth. In many cases, the routes that the other receivers are running aren't so much to get those receivers open. Rather, most of the time they are designed simply to draw defenders into positions that give the primary receiver as much room as possible. They essentially are just decoys.
Short post to Kittle. He is the number one read. Comes out, runs a short post. Now the whole play is they run this basically like a little drive route, shallow, to clear it out. Up top, this is oftentimes a corner, but right here it looks like they run almost like a corner stop, which is a good zone play. Then they come back and run this little shallow, takes the place and replaces this route coming through. There's nobody right here in this area. It's an excellent third down call. Every team runs a variation of this. 1, 2, 3, throw it.
But if the primary receiver is covered, then the quarterback will have to go down the list of prioritized targets to find someone who isn't covered, or at least is less covered. Usually, if the defense covers the intended receiver, then it is because they pulled a defender out of another assignment in order to take away the primary target. If so, then the play will have a secondary target that is usually going into the part of the field that was left vacant by the defender who decided to cover that primary target. If a third defender moves to take away that secondary target, then the QB will have to look at a tertiary target who is similarly running into a part of the field that was hopefully left vacant by the defender who moved to cover the secondary target, and so on down the line. Going through these progressions, however, takes time. A quarterback cannot see the entire football field at a glance at once, not even the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He has to go through the process of turning his head or his body to look at each of his reads, then also spend time watching the defense to see where the defenders are actually going. In fact, I suspect that this may be part of the reason why bunch formations have become so popular in college and NFL football today. Not only do such formations create good spacing opportunities for outside and underneath routes, and also generate a lot of natural picks and rubs against defenders, but they also allow the quarterback to make a single read in a single part of the field that informs up to 3 different receivers. This is opposed to a more traditional formation that requires scanning from one wideout on one end of the field to a tight end in the middle of the field, then to another wideout on the opposite end of the field, before finally settling on a check down to like the running back coming out of the backfield. and not necessarily even in that order. A defense hopes that if they defend the first and second target, then their pass rush or blitz will get to the quarterback before he has time to look at his third or fourth option. The purpose of a blitz is to rush more defenders than the offensive line can block, thereby pressuring the quarterback into throwing the ball before he's even had time to finish making his second read. After all, blitzing an extra defender is necessarily going to leave one less defender in coverage, which means there's going to be a hole somewhere in the coverage that the offense can exploit. That is, of course, if the receiver has enough time to get there, and if the QB has enough time to see where that hole is. And this, of course, assumes that the defender in coverage doesn't lock down his man and make a great play on the ball, which is something that can thwart even the best conceived of offensive plays. If the blitz is quick enough, then the defense may only have to defend the QB's first read and maybe their second read. And if that read is covered, then the QB may be forced to throw into that coverage and risk the pass being deflected or knocked down, or worse yet, risk an interception. Otherwise, the quarterback is going to have to take a sack or try to scramble or throw the ball away. The sack or the interception is kind of a bonus, icing on the cake. Really, all they are trying to do is force the quarterback to have to make a bad throw before the play is fully set up in order to prevent the offense from gaining yards and to force them to have to punt on fourth down. This is why the first rule of pass blocking is that you block the inside-most threats first, because they are the closest to the quarterback. You protect the A gap first, then you protect the B gap, and so on and so on.
You could easily make the argument that you'd love to flip it out to the bubble up top, but he doesn't have time to get through his read. You got someone running through the A gap. The first rule of pass pro on just about every team is not to have free runners through the A and the B gap.
If you don't have enough blockers and you must leave a defender unblocked, then your pass protection should ideally leave the outside-most pass rusher free. That rusher will then have to run around the blockers, taking the longest path possible towards the quarterback, which gives the quarterback more time to complete more reads and hopefully get rid of the ball in time. Now, you could make the argument that this is, in fact, how Madden works. The human user has to scan the field with your eyes to find the open receiver. If the defense gets to the QB before you can do that, then it's a sack. That's true at a surface level, but it breaks down in practice. First of all, scanning the field from a zoomed-out bird's-eye view is a lot quicker and easier from a simple body mechanics perspective. The entire field is available to you at a glance, allowing you to make split-second decisions that even an NFL QB might have trouble making. Any receiver on the field is just a button press away, no matter where they are on the field or in the quarterback's progression tree. The human user doesn't have to turn the quarterback's body or head to face the receiver before throwing. This motion is handled automatically in a split second when you press the button, much faster than in real life. To make matters worse, quarterbacks in Madden can regularly throw across their bodies and into blind spots with pinpoint accuracy and rarely with a substantial penalty. Case in point, if I make this same exact overload blitz by manually bringing my nickelback into the blindside B gap at the last second, just like Minnesota does here, I am leaving the hitch route from the bunch open, and the opponent, whether that opponent happens to be a human user or the CPU, can instantly diagnose that and throw hot with a single button press. This is true even if the tackle lets the blitzing backer through the B gap, rather than blocking the B gap and forcing the defensive end to take the longer path around to the QB. This happens because the QB can effectively see the entire field and does not have to spend time going through progressions. Or, Madden will just motion shift all of the blockers over to magically pick up the overload blitz. It's becoming less common in more recent years, but it does still happen. The problems get even worse when a CPU quarterback is behind center. The CPU QB is not limited by how quickly it can scan the field with its eyes, whether it's looking in a bird's eye view or not, let alone being limited by the limited vision and reaction time of the human user. The CPU QB can instantly diagnose the defense with perfect information and identify the optimal receiver to throw to, assuming, of course, that the programmers programmed the game well enough to be able to do that. It basically just comes down to the difficulty setting and a random number generator that determines whether the CPU QB will make that optimal decision or not. To prove this point, I would like to remind you all of a late season update that was released for Madden 17 that broke the CPU quarterback throwing logic and introduced what the community came to call Robo QBs. The QBs would throw the ball to an open receiver within just a couple seconds of snapping the ball with near perfect accuracy, resulting in even average quarterbacks consistently achieving 80 or 90% accuracy ratings in game after game. They weren't even pretending to go through progressions, because, after all, that is exactly what Madden is normally doing. Pretending. This update rendered Madden 17, which I thought was an otherwise solid release by modern Madden standards, virtually unplayable on the All-Pro or All-Madden difficulties. This bug, or feature, or whatever the heck you want to call it, serves to highlight the underlying problem, which is that quarterbacks in the game do not have to go through progressions. They can instantly identify an open target and throw to him without having to take the time to put his eyes or body in the proper position to make the throw. To further highlight this point, let's compare throwing the ball in modern Madden games against throwing the ball in Backbreaker or in Maximum Football 19. In Backbreaker football, you are locked into a ground-level perspective. You can only see part of the field at a time, and that view is at ground level, where the view can be obscured by other players, including even your own blockers. And you have to press buttons in order to move your point of view to another part of the field. It is a hell of a lot harder to throw the ball in Backbreaker than it is in Madden. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that Backbreaker is or was a better football game than any particular iteration of Madden. It wasn't, at least I didn't think so. Though I really do wish that Backbreaker had gotten at least one sequel to try to iron out the problems and flesh out some of its better ideas and mechanics, because that game was full of some pretty good ideas and mechanics. Oh well, whatever. In any case, Backbreaker's default passing mechanic was much closer to how a real NFL quarterback would play. Because of that, Backbreaker basically expected the average video gamer, the Joe Schmo armchair quarterback, to be able to read the field like an NFL quarterback, which is just far too much to expect from the average gamer, and is probably a big reason why that game failed. Maximum Football 19, on the other hand, has a slight input delay when pressing a button to throw to a receiver, at least it does on the PS4 version that I played. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a deliberate design choice on the part of Canuck Play, or if it's a bug or flaw or error in the game's coding. In any case, the effect, at least from my perspective, is that you actually do kind of have to identify an opening in the defense slightly in advance. Otherwise, the delay in controls might cause you to miss the throwing window. CPU quarterbacks, however, don't seem to be burdened by this input delay at all. Neither of those games has provided ideal solutions to this problem. In fact, to the credit of Electronic Arts, we have to look back to an older version of Madden, which may have stumbled onto a decent middle ground solution 15 years ago. They just, for whatever reason, didn't stick with it. Madden 2006 introduced the QB vision cone mechanic.
In Madden NFL 06, we have revolutionized the way you pass the football. We have added QB vision and the ability to throw precise passes when using the vision.
This mechanic projected a spotlight across the field originating from the quarterback's head. If the quarterback threw within this spotlight, the passes would be more accurate, relevant to the respective quarterback's pass accuracy ratings. If the quarterback threw outside of the spotlight, passes would be less accurate than the quarterback's ratings. The width of the cone would be determined by the individual quarterback's awareness ratings, and also by whether or not he was scrambling. At the higher difficulty settings, receiver icons would even fade away and disappear if they are outside of the vision cone, meaning that even if you knew where the receiver was, you couldn't just push the button to throw it to him and hope that you just get a lucky throw.
Vision precision changes the offense in a couple different ways. First, it actually makes you have to make reads. It forces you to go through your progressions while dropping back to pass. You also have to look at your targets before you throw it. In previous versions, you could actually drop back, throw to a target that was completely in the other side of the field, and there was no real penalty for doing that. Now there is a penalty for that.
In most video games, you can just hit a button, the quarterback will just throw it wherever he wants. Now, you really got to know what's going on. You really got to understand the game.
If you throw
This QB vision cone mechanic solved, or at the very least mitigated, most of the problems that I've discussed in this video. Even though the user still had a bird's eye view of the field, you had to scan the cone across the field to simulate the idea of the QB turning his head to go through his progressions. Turning the cone also turned the QB's body, and trying to throw across the quarterback's body would lead to an additional accuracy penalty. And if you would scramble, you might not be able to rotate the cone in the opposite direction of the QB scramble, which mitigated the exploit of scrambling QBs throwing across the field.
small. So in previous versions, our fans would lean towards Michael Vick or Donovan McNabb because they could throw and they had speed. So those that have speed are now just as effective with their speed, but if they don't have a great field of vision in real life, they'll have a very poor field of vision in our game, which makes them a little more challenging to use.
The size of a QB's vision cone actually made a considerable difference in how the user would control the quarterback, and so the awareness rating of the user quarterback was much more relevant to a user, and also had a much more tangible effect that a user could more easily understand. Having a vision cone that was big enough to consistently encompass multiple receivers instead of just the one intended receiver reduced the number of inputs and also time necessary to go through progressions and make a throw. A QB like Rex Grossman was much slower in making his reads than a quarterback like Peyton Manning, because Manning could see so much of the field all at once and had access to throw to multiple receivers without having to move his vision cone. Having a low awareness quarterback would also influence your team building and play calling. The limited field of view meant that it was much more important to call plays that would scheme a receiver open against the defense that you expect to see, whereas a more talented QB with higher awareness and larger vision cone would be much more likely to be able to just chuck the ball up to any receiver who happens to come open. You didn't have as much time to move your vision back and forth across the field with a less talented QB, so having the right play called, making the right read, and identifying the open receiver before the snap would become so much more crucial to your success. Furthermore, you would actually notice a difference if your starting quarterback got hurt and you had to rely on a backup with a much lower awareness rating. You might actually consider looking into signing a veteran free agent if it meant you'd get a higher awareness QB with a bigger vision cone. The quarterback vision cone mechanic also improved defensive play. The CPU QB would also project a cone out onto the field, which meant that a human user controlling a linebacker or a safety was actually able to follow the opposing quarterback's eyes to potentially jump routes, which is something that real safeties and linebackers in real football actually do. Inversely, a clever user or a clever CPU quarterback could also use this mechanic to look off a defender by baiting a safety or linebacker to one side of the field, then turning his field of vision to the other side of the play and throwing against the flow of the defense. I'm not sure if the CPU defenders were programmed to react to the user QB's vision cone, because this is a game from 15 years ago, so I'm not sure if looking off a defender was something that actually worked against the CPU, let alone whether or not CPU QBs would ever try doing it against human users controlling a defender. Despite the innovation and realism that this feature brought to the game, the vision cone proved to be an unpopular mechanic with a large cohort of Madden players. And for justifiable reasons. Madden 06 was not a perfect game, not by any stretch of the imagination. Despite the so-called precision passing mechanic that came alongside the vision cone, quarterbacks in Madden 06 had a lot of trouble putting the ball in the right spot on many route concepts. This led to far too many balls being swatted down by defenders, despite the receivers being, in NFL terms anyway, wide open. CPU QBs would often also get stuck rotating their vision cones back and forth, causing the QB to spin around in circles until he gets sacked. These problems, along with others, combined to make the CPU very ineffective at throwing the ball. This was, of course, compounded by usability issues with the vision cone controls. Many users felt that it required too many button inputs and was generally hard to use, and they weren't necessarily wrong. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the same complaints are the primary reason that Tiburon scrapped the targeted passing mechanic that was introduced in Madden 18 and then abandoned before Madden 19. But yet the abysmal tackle battle QTE mechanic somehow managed to remain in the game for 3 or 4 years. Like, who the heck thought that was a good idea? In any case, a lot of players back in 2005 and 2006 just turned the QB vision cone off. The following year, it was disabled by default, and a year or two later, it was completely removed from the game. EA did not try to improve the controls or add any assist features or to further tutorialize the mechanic in order to make it easier for the players to use. They just cut it. To be fair, I will confess that at the time, 20-year-old me did not understand the sport of football well enough to be able to use the QB vision cone mechanic effectively. This mechanic practically required the user to have a basic understanding of NFL pass concepts and progressions in order to make sure that the user was looking at the right receiver at the right point in his route in order to be successful at passing the ball.
Trubisky doesn't actually turn to look at that deep out until Gabriel is already out of his break and has a defender already recovering to come undercut that route. At this point, you can't throw the deep out because the window's closed. It's too late.
I bet a lot of players, especially younger players like myself at the time, simply did not know route concepts well enough, if at all. And so this mechanic made the game considerably harder unless you happen to be a Colts fan. As I have grown up and come to learn the game of football better, I now find myself looking back at the QB vision cone mechanic with a nostalgic understanding and respect for what it was trying to do, and how it fairly elegantly solved a lot of problems that Madden struggles to deal with even today. And apparently, I'm not alone, as I've seen more and more support for the return of the mechanic, or something similar, within the Madden community. If you didn't like the QB vision cone, then before you turn your nose at the idea of it returning, please keep in mind that modern Madden has a lot more assist features for users who maybe don't understand the sport of football as well. It also has the extensive skill trainer, which systematically teaches users the basics behind each and every route concept that is included within the game, and the weekly preparation mechanic in franchise mode allows the user to refresh their memory and practice various concepts until you've mastered them, all without having to leave your franchise game to go back through dedicated tutorials. That by itself could make the QB vision cone a much more viable feature in modern Madden games, as compared to a decade and a half ago when assist features were virtually non-existent. EA could also further supplement the vision cone by adding additional optional assist features. The game could label the progression order in the play art, both in the play call screen and on the field, either by numbering each receiver or color-coding the receiver's route so that you know which is the first in the progression, which is the second in the progression, third in progression, and so on. Currently, the game only highlights the primary target. So, for example, maybe the primary target could have a blue route, the secondary could have a green route, followed by yellow and orange, with a hot route having a red-colored route. In fact, when I first played Maximum Football 2018, I mistakenly thought that that's what the play art was showing, but it turned out that it was actually just matching the color of the receiver's route to the color of the buttons on the Xbox controller. I didn't recognize that at the time because I was playing the game on PS4, but Canuck never bothered to change the colors for PS4 users, and so I didn't make the connection until it was pointed out to me in an online forum by an Xbox player who probably thought it should be obvious. But, whatever. Another wild possibility could be to tie the progression to specific buttons on the controller. If looking at a PlayStation controller, for example, the first read might always be the X receiver, the second read always the square receiver, third read always the triangle receiver, fourth always the circle receiver, and the hot receiver always being the R1 button, regardless of where the receivers are on the field. And there could be an audible chime, or a visual indicator on the screen, or a vibration of the controller, or some other feedback telling the user when to move on to the next read in the sequence. This way, following your QB vision progressions would be as simple as rotating your thumb around the face buttons when prompted to do so. Madden could also highlight the defenders who you should be keying off of, just like it does in the skill trainer tutorials. If a particular route concept is supposed to create a high-low conflict for a particular defender, then Madden could highlight that defender as the primary read in order to remind the user of who they should be looking at. Madden could also have an optional assist mode that would cause the user QB to automatically progress through his reads. A user who maybe doesn't understand the progression order wouldn't have to move the cone manually right and left to different places on the field in order to highlight receivers at the right time. He or she would only have to wait for the vision cone to automatically highlight over an open receiver and then press the throw button. Coincidentally, that probably also could have made Backbreaker a lot more playable. I think there's a lot of ways that Tiburon could make a feature like QB Vision more user-friendly. And all of them could be optional in case hardcore players want to turn it all off, as they sometimes do. Tiburon just never tried any of this stuff 15 years ago because EA made them move on to new back-of-the-box selling points, instead of iterating on the ideas that were already in the game. None of that has ever happened, and I think there might still be enough lingering resentment towards the Vision Cone that EA might probably be hesitant to reinstate it. But I still say it would solve so many of the game's current problems. In lieu of an elegant solution, like the Vision Cone, EA has instead relied on various band-aid solutions to try to address these problems. The game applies arbitrary accuracy penalties for when QBs are throwing on the run, or if the game decides that the defense is applying a certain degree of pressure on the QB. I mean, this mechanic is fine, I guess, especially in the cases of throwing on the run or throwing off of a back foot. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's also so abstracted that it's really hard to tell what the thresholds for triggering these effects are. I've seen QBs get accuracy penalties, supposedly for pressure, even in a clean pocket. But then, on another play, another QB can turn around backwards, slip in snow or rain, then pick himself up and, without even looking, throw a perfectly accurate ball, completely blind, with a defender in his face, with no penalty at all. The X-Factor mechanics of Madden 20 went on to make pass rushers much more effective at breaking blocks and sacking quarterbacks in order to try to limit the opportunities that users have to throw deep down the field. This, however, has its own problems. It doesn't accurately reflect how pass rushers generate pressure, and it leads to far too many sacks. But this particular video has perhaps already gone on too long, so I have to save that concept of generating pass pressure for another day. Would a reinstatement of the QB Vision Cone solve all of those aforementioned problems? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But even if it doesn't, it still has value in that it enables other football tactics, such as I said before, defenders being able to follow the eyes of the QB and react to that accordingly, which is something that has just not been possible at all ever since.
We're good to go. There's a lot of armchair quarterbacks in Madden, and they say, well, you hear them talking like, I would have did this, would have did that. Now they get on Madden. Well, let's see what you're going to do.
Like, if it's in the game,
it's in the game.
It's in the game.
It's in the game. EA Sports. It's in the game.